Good evening, and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Seán Pieper, and I'm joined this evening by William Duguid, writer and activist, and we'll be joined also later in the programme by Alison Thewliss, the MP for Central Glasgow, and the SNP's Home Affairs spokesperson at Westminster. Welcome to the programme, William.
Thank you, and it's good to be on with you, Seán.
Thank you. But we begin first with our updates from Ukraine and Gaza, day 790 of the war in Ukraine. Russia has launched a drone attack on Ukraine that injured 7 people in the Black Sea port of Odessa, 2 of them children, and also targeted Kyiv, the capital, Ukrainian military officials said early on Tuesday. Several residential buildings in Odessa were damaged and caught fire, according to Seán Pieper, governor of the Odessa region. In Kyiv, air defence systems destroyed incoming drones, said Sergei Popko, head of the Kyiv military administration. The Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has said legislation passed by the US House of Representatives and awaiting Senate approval had clarified that Ukraine would be receiving the longer-range version of the ATAK-MS Army Tactical Missile System that it has long sought. ATAK-MS is highly prized by the Ukrainian army for its firepower, speed of deployment, and accuracy, but Ukraine has so far been restricted to a version that can only fire 165 kilometres, whereas the newer versions can fire approximately 300 kilometres. ATAK-MS can be launched from the similarly prized HIMARS system, already supplied by the US to Ukraine. Rishi Sunak has promised the UK's largest ever military support package for Ukraine, as he warned that Vladimir Putin would not stop at the Polish border if Russia won the war. The UK plans to give vital equipment to Kyiv, including 400 vehicles, 1,600 weapons, and 4 million rounds of ammunition, as well as an additional £500 million in military funding, taking the total to £3 billion this financial year. European ministers said that they were looking urgently at how to provide more air defence to Ukraine, but stopped short of concrete pledges to supply the Patriot system that Kyiv values most. Meeting in Luxembourg, foreign and defence ministers from the EU said that the US House of Representatives' vote to approve a Ukraine aid package at the weekend should not lead to any complacency on their part. Since Kyiv began a push for more Patriots in recent weeks, Germany has been the only EU country to pledge an extra battery. Officials have said it is hard for countries to part with Patriots, as they are an integral part of national defences. Volodymyr Zelensky has said that a Russian missile strike, which broke in half a 240-metre-high television tower in Kharkiv on Monday, is part of a deliberate effort by Moscow to make Ukraine's second-largest city uninhabitable. The northeastern city, of 1.3 million people, lies 30 kilometres from the Russian border. Communications officials said that they were working to restore the television signal, urging residents of the city and region without digital television to use cable or online television or the radio. Ukraine's military said that it was still in control of the village of Novomykhailivka, 40 kilometres southwest of the Ukrainian city of Donetsk, which Russian forces earlier claimed to have captured. Russia said on Sunday that its forces gained territory near the key battleground of Chasiv Yar in East Ukraine, taking control of Bogdanivka, a small village less than 3 kilometres northeast of the town. Poland has said that it is ready to host nuclear arms if NATO decides to deploy them in the face of Russian reinforcement of its armaments in Belarus and Kaliningrad, the Polish president Andrzej Duda said in an interview published on Monday. Now turning to Gaza, at least 34,183 Palestinian people have been killed and 77,143 injured in Israeli strikes on Gaza since the 7th of October, the Gaza Health Ministry has said in a statement. At Nasser Hospital, southern Gaza's main health facility, authorities are reported to have received a further 35 to have recovered a further 35 bodies in the past day, from what they say is one of at least 3 mass graves found at the site, taking the total found there to 310 in the past week. UN rights chief Volker Turk said that he was horrified by the destruction of Nasser and Al Shifa medical facilities in Gaza, and at the reports of mass graves discovered there. Turk, addressing a UN briefing via a spokesperson, also decried Israeli strikes on Gaza in recent days, which he said have killed mostly women and children. He also repeated a warning against a full-scale incursion on Rafah, the southernmost city in Gaza, where more than 1 million people are sheltering, saying that this could lead to further atrocity crimes. Israel bombarded northern Gaza overnight in some of the heaviest shelling in weeks, residents said. Shelling was intense east of Beit Hanun and Jabalia, and continued this morning in areas such as Zaytun, one of Gaza City's oldest suburbs, with residents reporting at least 10 strikes in a matter of seconds along the main road. Just west of Beit Hanun, in Beit Lahia, medics and Hamas media said that strikes had hit a mosque and a crowd gathering on the coastal road to collect aid dropped from the air. A Palestinian rights group's legal challenge to try to stop UK arms exports to Israel over allegations of breaches of international law in the war in Gaza will be heard in October at London's highest court, a judge ruled today. Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah group said that it had launched a drone attack against Israeli military bases north of the city of Acre, in its deepest strike into Israeli territory since Israel's war in Gaza began in October. The Israeli military said it had no knowledge of any of its facilities being hit by Hezbollah, but had said earlier on Tuesday that it intercepted 2 aerial targets off Israel's northern coast. Hezbollah said it acted in retaliation for an earlier Israeli attack, killing one of its fighters. And Qatar has said that there is no reason to end the presence of an office for Hamas in Doha, while its mediation efforts continue amid Israel's war in Gaza. It came after the US State Department said that Hamas had moved the goalpost and changed its demands in negotiations with Israel. However, it is not clear what exactly has shifted in the details of the talks, which are being mediated by Egypt and by Qatar. Now, returning to these disturbing reports of the discovery of mass graves at both Nasser Hospital and Al Shifa Hospital, we're hearing really disturbing details in relation to bodies being recovered decapitated, bodies where organs have clearly been removed, where skin has been removed, potentially for skin grafting, and perhaps most disturbing of all, the bodies of children recovered with their hands tied and who had clearly been shot. This makes me question, William, how in 6 months, in a year, whenever this ends, in whatever that looks like, how will the UK reflect on its response to this disaster in Gaza?
Well, I very much hope the UK looks back with a great deal of regret, because I think it should. The UK continues to supply arms to Israel and shows no sign of even considering stopping it. And yet we keep hearing what atrocities are being committed and what our arms are doing to them. So I think there will be reflections to come, and they may be more than just reflections, because there is a significant possibility, I think, that senior UK politicians and others may be charged with complicity in war crimes and or genocide. And, you know, in a sense, the legal action that isn't being heard until October is kind of a way to save the UK from itself, you might think. Of course, we're not the only ones supplying arms, and part of the big US bill that's currently going through the Senate, having first been cleared by the House of Representatives, has a significant amount of money going to Israel for support. Not as big as to Ukraine, but nevertheless, that's part of the package, or at least it is, unless one of the amendments that Bernie Sanders is currently looking at strips out Israel. So there's that. Both of those nations, I suspect, if they're capable of self-reflection, will be reflecting on their actions very much. And the other thing I would say is, of course, not only have we been supplying arms, we have defunded UNRWA the UN Relief Agency for Gaza on, I think, very spurious grounds, and very quickly once those grounds were announced. There's no sign of that funding being restored. And consequently, getting aid to the Palestinian people has become extraordinarily difficult. If it wasn't going to be difficult anyway, it certainly has become much more difficult since. And that is another thing that I think the UK will have to reflect on. In contrast, I would say, to the Scottish Government, which has been one of the voices that has been against the excesses that we've seen really from the beginning. And I think, they're not being commended for very much at the minute, so they should certainly be commended for that.
Absolutely. As you said, the Colonna report was published examining Israel's claims in regards to the UNRWA workers that it had alleged had participated in the 7th of October attacks. However, the report made it very clear that Israel had provided no evidence in relation to any of these individuals or their supposed complicity. However, ultimately, the damage is done, isn't it? It's a case of a very successful propaganda effort ultimately destroying an aid agency when it is needed the most.
Yes, and never significantly challenged the propaganda effort either. And that's one of the things where I think our media needs a wee bit of a talking to as well. That has never been, it's as if Israeli spokesmen can come up and say just about anything, and they don't get properly challenged. And of course, when they do, they get quite cross about it. But we are seeing a propaganda onslaught that we are actually abetting.
Well, that's it. It's the idea of, through creating balance, we are actually, because we in the West, in Western media certainly, are far more inundated with media coming out of Israel, press releases, the words of spokespeople, etc., that ultimately, as you said, we are inadvertently or so abetting that. Now, moving on, the Scottish Parliament has today debated the Victims and Witnesses Justice Reform Bill at Stage 1. The bill proposes the abolition of Scotland's not proven verdict, a reduction in the number of jurors in criminal trials from 15 to 12, with a requirement for a 2/3 majority for a guilty verdict. There are also proposals to pilot a new specialist sexual offences court, which could hear rape trials without a jury. Justice Secretary Angela Constance has described the bill as landmark and historic. The bill has already been scrutinised by the Scottish Parliament's Criminal Justice Committee. The committee convener, Audrey McNichol, MSP, said that they agreed with the bill's general principles on the basis that it is designed to improve the system for victims and witnesses, but believe that further evidence, data and scrutiny is required. The committee stated that it had not heard compelling evidence to support some of the proposals, in particular the changes to juries. Angela Constance expected the legislation would be amended, but reminded MSPs that there is a consensus that the bill will change the experiences of victims and witnesses, particularly in cases involving sexual offences. So not only the end of the not proven verdict in Scotland, but which, some people will be certainly happy to see the back of. My question, William, is why is it that success rates in terms of actually prosecuting sexual offences are so low at this point? Why is it that such a radical approach is necessary to deliver justice?
Well, to a certain extent, it's guesswork, but they are very much lower, aren't they? I mean, the 5-year average conviction rate for rape is 24%, and the conviction rate in general for crimes is something more like 84%. That's a tremendous difference. My guess is, and it's a reasonably educated guess, that it's such a difficult experience for victims, and indeed in many occasions witnesses, to give evidence in a court with a jury while under attack from from a defence lawyer, that it's really, it needs to change. And in terms of the conviction rate, I suspect that juries are often swung by the fact that the victims are not really, in their eyes, putting up a great performance against the lawyers' challenges. And it's just a very, very frightening and difficult experience for them. And I think it's at least worth trying to see if a judge-led inquiry leads to a wee bit less nonsense from the defence lawyers, and maybe just the possibility that the facts of the case may be looked at a bit differently. I think it will result in a greater prosecution rate. Of course, what we really want is for it to result in a better justice rate, so that the prosecutions that are successful deserve to be successful, because that's what the evidence generally supports. So it's something that's needed looked at for a long time, and I suspect should be looked at in other jurisdictions as well, because I think the figures are probably not much different in those other jurisdictions. It's a very interesting one. I suspect it will be tagged controversial by certain vested interests, but I think a pilot is worth a try, and the evidence that comes out of the pilot should be looked at very carefully to see if it does have the desired result. And principal among that, for me, will not necessarily be the conviction rate in and of itself, but the experiences of victims and witnesses. And they really need to take a bit of care about finding that out and then applying those lessons going forward.
Thanks, William. Now, one of Rishi Sunak's dementia advisors has resigned over the government's approach towards unpaired carers, describing the prosecutions of vulnerable people as beyond the pale. Johnny Timpson, who advised Number 10 on its dementia strategy, said that he wanted to take a stand after The Guardian revealed that tens of thousands of unpaid carers were being fined huge sums and, in some cases, prosecuted for minor infringements of earnings rules. The former Cabinet Office advisor said that he had been quite disenchanted with the Conservative government's approach towards people with disabilities for some time, but that this had now come to a head. In recent weeks, media reports have documented the despair and misery experienced by unpaid carers forced to pay huge fines and sometimes prosecuted for fraud after minor breaches of carers' allowance earnings rules amounting to a few pounds. They include a 92-year-old woman with advanced Parkinson's who was ordered to pay back nearly £7,000 in disability allowance after failing to notify the department of a change in circumstances 5 years ago, when she was in the early stages of dementia. Timpson, who was awarded an OBE in 2022, sat in the Prime Minister's Dementia-Friendly Communities Champion Group. He was previously a Cabinet Office Disability Ambassador. He said that the DWP's approach to carers' allowance was in breach of its own policy towards protecting vulnerable benefit claimants. Now, in a week where we have seen the Prime Minister virtually out and out attacking disabled people in England and Wales, this seems like a really worrying trend of perhaps an expansion of culture war politics into this area. You know, benefit claimants in general have often been at the sharp end of the Tory stick, but is it now, you know, the disabled and their carers who are the enemy of the British state?
Well, the benefit system in general has been a hostile environment in the UK for quite a while. In contrast, it has to be said again, to the Scottish Government's approach, which is much more claimant-centred. In terms of caring, I have only anecdotal evidence about the difference between the two, but certainly one acquaintance of mine who is a full-time carer said that his experience of the old UK system and of the new Scottish system was chalk and cheese in terms of the just the ease with which they were able to sort of state the case and indeed not have any hassle on an ongoing basis. Previously, it had been a bit of a nightmare. So, in terms of culture wars, yeah, there are dog whistles going on for please vote Tory because we really will stop people from busting the system, kind of thing, and many other dog whistles. It's inevitable just before an election. I think it is certainly the case, though, that apart from any rhetoric that politicians are saying, there has been a really bad experience for carers who have either made the small mistakes or have worked extra hours and didn't realise what the implications were, or even have just had a pay rise. And those small mistakes suddenly turn into huge consequences. And the ironic thing, or maybe it's not ironic, maybe it's to be derided, is that the DWP has got the IT systems that know when the earnings cap is likely to be busted and can do something about it at the time. They can perhaps correct the amount of payments so that they don't stack up and so that they don't arrive at a huge sum owing at the end. But they haven't done so because of, well, administrative difficulties, perhaps underfunding of the service. So that all goes into it. The culture war sometimes happens accidentally because the government refuses to fund and to resource its agencies adequately to do their job. And I suspect that that is as much at the heart of this as anything. But then again, you know, prosecuting people to the nth degree, that's something the post office did in entirely spurious ways. It is part of a more general culture that really does need challenging. And I'm quite glad to see that certainly in the early days of the Scottish government looking at the welfare system, we are adopting a different approach. And I hope that goes on. And I hope that when independent, we make a much better fist of the whole of our benefits system on an ongoing basis than the UK is currently doing.
Now, at least 5 leading lenders today increased their rates on their fixed mortgage deals in response to market uncertainty, adding to pressure on home buyers and those looking to remortgage. Barclays, HSBC, NatWest, Accord Mortgages, part of the Yorkshire Building Society, and Leeds Building Society have all upped the cost of some fixed rate deals. In some cases, these have risen by up to 0.4 percentage points. Money market swap rates, which largely determine the pricing of new fixed deals, have ticked on slightly in response to Bank of England interest rate expectations, prompting lenders to reprise some of their deals, said Danny Belton, head of the lending and broker firm Mortgage Advice Bureau. Mortgage costs have endured a rollercoaster ride over the last 2 years. The fallout from the disastrous September 2022 mini-budget helped push the price of many new fixed-rate deals to above 6%. Adding to home buyers' woes, the prospect of a summer cut in UK interest rates receded today, after Hugh Pym, the Bank of England's chief economist, cautioned against the BOE cutting rates too soon in a speech in London. Following his speech, financial markets pushed back expectations that the bank would start cutting interest rates to September. And in Germany, an AfD politician's aide was arrested on suspicion of spying for China. A close advisor to Germany's far-right populist Alternative für Deutschland party, the AfD, has been arrested on suspicion of spying for China in the latest high-profile espionage case to have come to light. The man, identified by prosecutors as Yan Ji, was accused of an especially severe instance of espionage, prosecutors said, following his arrest in the early hours of Tuesday morning. It comes after the arrests of 3 German citizens accused of industrial spying for China in return for payment. Maximilian Krah, the AfD's top candidate in the European parliamentary elections in early June, said in a statement that he found out about the arrest of his employee, Yan Guo, from the press on Tuesday. His arrest in Dresden, where he lives with his wife and family, took place just a week after the Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, visited China to work on bilateral economic relations and discuss Beijing's political and logistical support for Russia in its war in Ukraine. Prosecutors said that the man was aged 43 and had dual German and Chinese citizenship, and said that it was believed that he had been spying for the Chinese secret services for years. Investigators have accused Guo of spying in particular on Chinese opposition figures living in exile in Germany, having apparently posed as a dissident himself and passing the information on to a liaison officer. Guo had also offered his services to the German intelligence authorities around a decade ago, but was turned down amid suspicions he planned to operate as a double agent, prosecutors said. In the UK on Monday, 2 men were charged with handing over articles, notes, documents, or information to China between 2021 and 2023. Police have named the men as Christopher Berry, 32, and Christopher Cash, 29, who previously worked in the UK Parliament as a researcher. So the UK is clearly very much susceptible to this as well. How much of a threat is espionage in the British Parliament, would you say, William?
Espionage is everywhere. I am sure there are Chinese agents. I'm sure there are Russian agents, and we have our own agents there, and it's always gone on. So it's as much of a threat as our defences of it allow it to be, and how good a sort of wall our intelligence services can build. I rather suspect with the British charges just being laid, and with the two events in Germany, not necessarily themselves linked to one another, I wonder if at some level one spy on the other side hasn't been turned and has sort of identified some of the Chinese spies on this side. It looks as if maybe there's been a wee breakthrough there. But it's gone on for years and years and years, and lots of John le Carre wouldn't have made a living without it. But yeah, we do have to watch, and it's a dangerous world that we are living in, and particularly with the geopolitical situation that's beginning to boil out of control, we will see more of this kind of thing. So yeah, the world of intelligence is a closed book to me. I don't mean sort of general brain intelligence, I just mean espionage type intelligence. And it really does belong to the world of John le Carre for me. But yeah, I see this as probably par for the course and business as usual, if that doesn't sound too complacent.
Now, today there was a meeting of SNP MSPs and the BBC Director General Tim Davie in Holyrood. The SNP Holyrood Group Convener Stuart McMillan MSP said that the SNP is a firm supporter of public broadcasting and that today's meeting was an important opportunity for MSPs to engage directly with the Director General. This was a wide-ranging discussion which explored the recent cuts to Scotland-based programming, the importance of accuracy in reporting, particularly in news and current affairs, and the declining trust in the corporation in Scotland and in the media more widely. SNP MSPs will continue to make the case for greater investment in the BBC's commissioning budget being spent in Scotland, as well as holding the UK government to account for its sweeping cuts to the corporation's funding in recent years. I thank the Director General for his time today and look forward to assessing progress on the issues raised as we continue to hold the BBC to the highest standards to protect the future of public broadcasting in Scotland. Stuart McMillan, MSP, the Holyrood Group Convener, said. Now, five people, including a child.
Would you like me to comment on the story?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, I don't have a particular comment on it, except to say that I think the BBC have been at it for a very long time. And obviously, as an independent supporter, I would say that. And I do think that I understand that the SNP are basically the Scottish government and have to be diplomatic. But I would be a lot harsher with the BBC. And perhaps the communique belies the actual nature of the meeting, because the BBC for me has been waging an onslaught against the Scottish government and indeed Scotland for most of the last 10 to 12 years, and it's got worse of late. And it's not just about programme cuts and budget cuts, but it's to do with effective slanting of the news and the way Scotland is framed, always as slightly failing, slightly difficult place to live. And it does not happen in other parts of the UK. The other, if you like, local news, is the news where you are, so to speak, in those other places, is generally quite upbeat about their areas. And I mean, I couldn't believe this was going to be possible. So I actually tested it out and watched a few things like Look North and some other. And they're all very buoyant about their areas insofar as they can be. Even if there's a bad news story, it's treated in a way that doesn't make it look like the whole place is falling apart. So I think the BBC is doing its job. The BBC is supposed to defend the union as part of its remit, and so in a sense, one can hardly blame them for it. But nevertheless, I think we need to be a lot better at calling it out. And if I might add, finally, I think for the Scottish government really to make a change, maybe it should look at supporting independent broadcasters a wee bit more.
Well, that's exactly the issue is, as you say, this sort of exceptional attitude that BBC Scotland adopts functionally drives Scottish viewers and listeners away from it. So, they create their own ongoing problems, their own ongoing falling viewership, listenership, and engagement. But yet, the need to pay the licence fee, etc., is maintained. And it's no surprise that people in Scotland certainly people who are pro-independence, have very little time left for the BBC. But more broadly than that, would you say that there is just a sort of an ongoing disconnect, in a sense?
I think there's a pretty significant disconnect. I don't know the exact few figures, but uh, my wife won't let me watch certain editions of Reporting Scotland anymore at certain times of the day because I just grumble about them the whole time. I mean, it's partially my job as a writer and activist and occasional commentator on Broadcasting Scotland to know what's going on. So I have to watch a wee bit, but my God, you don't have to get depressed at some of the way they present things and the whole framing of Scotland. I think that does down everybody. And there must be some unionists that are a wee bit suspicious about that, surely.
Well, that's it. As you said, it ends up being an issue about how Scotland as a whole is presented, regardless of which side of the constitutional issue you sit on. So
Yeah.
I think the sort of the scorched earth policy, perhaps, as you could describe it, that they have adopted to Scotland has really ultimately backfired on them. Not in the sense that they have completely lost credibility, but actually just that as they continue to push that sort of narrative, more and more people are just not interested in hearing that, are tired of constant negativity, and are very well able to themselves, determine what their identity is and how they want to engage with it in terms of media.
I sure hope so. And if you haven't listened to it yet, James Robertson's The News Where You Are. Look it up on YouTube. He read it out at the Believe in Scotland rally in Glasgow on Saturday. And for me, it's one of the classics and absolutely sums the whole thing up.
Yeah, it's an excellent piece.
Oh,
Now, responding to the UK government's commitment to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2030, the SNP's defence spokesperson, Martin Doherty-Hughes MP, has said, the UK's conventional forces have been decimated by successive Tory and Labour Westminster governments, who've left us weak in the face of rising threats close to home. The hollowing out of the armed forces won't be reversed with a desperate smokescreen that will continue to see billions wasted on weapons of mass destruction, all while our infantry numbers sit at their lowest level in centuries. Our dwindled armed forces, currently being left to put up with deteriorating living conditions and material supplies, won't be made stronger while Labour and the Tories remain committed to sending billions into a nuclear black hole. Nor will we be taken seriously by those who threaten our security while we remain led by the Westminster parties responsible for a lack of transparency and accountability at the heart of the MOD. Okay, and I'm hearing now that we have Alison Thewliss, MP for Central Glasgow, and the SNP's Home Affairs spokesperson with us. Welcome to the programme, Alison.
Hello, good evening.
Hello.
hi there.
Now, 5 people, including a child, have died in an attempt to cross the Channel near the town of Wimereux, south of Calais, the French authorities have said. The prefect's office in Pas-de-Calais said that about 5 a.m. on Tuesday, a small boat carrying more than 110 people had departed near the Plage d'Allemande at Wimereux. After it first hitting a sandbank, the boat had continued to sea, the prefect's office had said. A provisional assessment reported 5 deaths, 3 men, a woman, and a child, reportedly aged 4, and 1 person slightly injured. The Calais prefect had travelled to the scene, and the public prosecutor at Boulogne-sur-Mer has opened an inquiry to shed light on the circumstances of this dramatic event. The incident comes hours after Rishi Sunak's government passed legislation to allow it to deport asylum seekers who arrive in the UK on small boats to Rwanda. The lack of safe routes or asylum visas has led over 6,000 people to attempt the journey across the Channel this year. Calling the latest deaths in the Channel utterly tragic, SNP Home Affairs spokesperson Alison Thewliss said, "The UK government has failed to listen to the reasons why people take these risks and have closed their minds to alternatives which would prevent dangerous journeys across continents." She said that the risk of losing your life in the Channel had been no deterrent to making this dangerous crossing. So as you say, Alison, clearly not a deterrent, and how would you respond to Rishi Sunak's claims that it is in some way an act of compassion to institute the Rwanda bill?
I mean, it couldn't be anything further from compassionate, in my view. It's absolutely awful and despicable and against all the things that the UK as a country has signed up to. So, for example, the Refugee Convention that we were part of, creating as the UK, completely against that, completely against our anti-trafficking and people's protection obligations. And I think it's really quite terrible that the Tories are trying to weaponise these tragic deaths on the Channel in support of their arguments. And the people that I listen to at my constituency surgeries every Friday, quite often those are people who have family perhaps in Afghanistan, perhaps in Sudan, perhaps in Yemen. They want to have them come to Scotland to reunite with them. But the family reunification process is so limited, so time consuming and so difficult that people can't sit in Afghanistan and wait for the UK government to process their paperwork. They can't sit in a literal war zone in Sudan and wait for the UK government to get round to granting their paperwork. So they make very difficult, very dangerous journeys because they have no other choice. And the UK government just does not recognise that whatsoever when they talk about people dying in the Channel.
Well, as you said, obviously in the course of passing the Rwanda bill, the protections for Afghan and interpreters have been, watered down to the extent that it applies only to a fraction of the people ultimately who assisted British military and civilian forces in Afghanistan. So it's no wonder that people's families here are generally despondent. How would you respond to this tragedy, William?
It's an absolute tragedy. And, I actually do believe that we should try to stop the small boats. But I think we should stop the small boats by making them unnecessary, by having those safe and legal routes through which people can have their asylum claims heard in a timely and suitably compassionate and practical fashion. And I think it's incumbent on the UK as a signatory to the Refugee Convention of 1951 to provide an asylum system that's fit for purpose, a properly funded, properly resourced one, and one that is fair and understands where refugees literally are coming from, the situations they have left, and tries to accommodate them as best they can and to find a place for them elsewhere if they don't meet the criteria. We've fallen so far short and show no signs of improving it. And this Rwanda policy seems to be a flagship policy for us, despite the fact that it's inherently immoral. It's inherently contradictory, because how can it be a deterrent if Rwanda is, as the law now claims or will claim, is safe? That doesn't make any sense at all. It's just an inhuman way to be dealing with people, and I look forward to the day when perhaps as an independent country, we can have a proper asylum system along with a proper immigration system.
Well, the Council of Europe's Human Rights Commissioner has also condemned the Rwanda scheme, saying that it raises major issues about the human rights of asylum seekers and the rule of law. Council of Europe Human Rights Commissioner Michael O'Flaherty said that the bill, which is expected to be signed into law today after passing its parliamentary stages on Monday night, was a grave concern and should not be used to remove asylum seekers or infringe on judges' independence. Mr. O'Flaherty said, "I'm concerned that the Rwanda bill enables the implementation of a policy of removing people to Rwanda without any prior assessment of their asylum claims by the UK authorities in the majority of cases," adding that the bill significantly excludes the ability of UK courts to fully and independently scrutinise the issues brought before them. The UK remains a member of the Council of Europe, an organisation which promotes human rights, democracy and the rule of law across the continent. Michael O'Flaherty warned that the UK was prohibited from subjecting, even indirectly, people to refoulement, the act of forcing a refugee or asylum seeker to a country or territory where he or she is likely to face prosecution, including under Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, under the Refugee Convention, and under a range of other international instruments. The bill was passed after the House of Lords eventually conceded on 2 amendments, but the government is expected to face a number of legal battles as it prepares to deport asylum seekers by July. Sunak has said that flights will begin taking asylum seekers to Kigali within 10 to 12 weeks, admitting he would miss his target of flights taking off by spring. A Home Office minister has said that the government was prepared for inevitable legal challenges to the Rwanda scheme. Charities and rights groups have condemned the passing of the bill as a stain on the country's moral reputation. Now, Alison, ultimately, is this a manufactured confrontation? Is the Rwanda scheme itself, with all of its limitations, even for those proposing it, ultimately an excuse to challenge the ECHR and for the UK ultimately to leave the ECHR?
Certainly see a route where that is the case. So this bill gets royal assent. The bill get. I can hear you. Yes, can you hear? So I can certainly see a route where this becomes of challenging the EC. Okay,
Sorry, Alison, please go
on?
ahead.
Is that okay? So I can certainly see a route where. Okay, not sure what's happening at my end. So I can certainly see a route where this becomes a mechanism for challenging ECHR. So, for example, the bill gets royal assent, and then there are challenges in the courts to this bill. It goes to the courts, and then the government says, well, the only way that we can overcome this is by pulling ourselves out of the ECHR. And I think that is really it is a prospect. It is very real, and we should certainly guard against that, because those are very important mechanisms that regard all of our human rights. We don't in the situation. We are the same as Russia, human rights, because they are not governed by the ECHR. I think we really need to be this.
Well, as you say, Alison, leaving the ECHR would put the UK alone with Russia and Belarus out with that framework within Europe. What repercussions, William, do you believe that this would have for people here, for the citizens of the UK, for Scottish people themselves in terms of their own rights?
Well, of course, no doubt the government would attempt to replace the European Court of Human Rights with a British Bill of Rights, but it won't be the same thing at all. It will be a one-size-fits-all thing, but more to the point, it will probably have several holes in it that make life just a wee bit harder than it currently is. Make, for example, the rights of protest a lot thinner than they currently are, although they are shrinking as it is. And I don't see it as a very good prospect at all. I think it is perfectly possible that the government is trying strategically to get out of the ECHR using this as an excuse. The Rwanda system affects such a small proportion of asylum seekers that it doesn't make sense to spend this much money unless you have some sort of ulterior motive. Whether they have time to do all of this before we get to the general election is another matter. And then there's the question, let's say we get to the general, it's very likely that we'll see a Labour government. I'll put it no higher than that. What will they do about all this? And that, as ever with the Labour Party, is just a massive question for me, to which I have no answer.
Well, exactly as you said, Labour's primary objections so far seem to have been around the costings of the Rwanda scheme, rather than various other aspects of it, the morality, the practicality, the actual point of it in the first place that many other people would certainly object to. Now, on that theme, to mark the 7th anniversary of the UK government's two-child policy and rape clause, SNP MSP Claire Hoy has led a members' debate in Holyrood, urging the UK government to reverse the policy and the other welfare reforms that have been implemented, with austerity policies since 2010. Sir Keir Starmer has refused to commit Labour to abolishing the two-child cap, which impacts over 87,000 children in Scotland. Poverty experts and campaigners have said that the policy is one of the biggest drivers of child poverty, and scrapping the measures would lift 15,000 children in Scotland out of poverty directly. In sharp contrast to Westminster, Scottish Government policies such as the game-changing Scottish Child Payment are expected to lift over 100,000 children out of poverty in Scotland this year. Commenting, SNP MSP Claire Hoy said, "The two-child cap and associated rape clause are indefensible policies inflicted on the people of Scotland by a cruel Tory UK government, and Labour's newfound support for these measures is shameful." Alison, why do you believe that the current Labour leadership, particularly Keir Starmer and his team, are so intently focused on maintaining policies like this, on maintaining Tory policy when they are demonstrably unpopular? So as an electoral strategy, not necessarily a given. Why is this the approach that we're seeing?
Well, the party have absolutely wedded themselves to Tory economic plans, which means that they are tied into these austerity measures like the limit. For me, there is absolutely no justification for this. It is a false economy because those families will suffer. They will not be able to reach their full potential. Those children will be kept in poverty, and we know that poverty and inequality are deeply harmful to our society. But worse than that, Labour seem not to realise that they cannot tackle child poverty without removing the two-child limit. Those two things, you cannot achieve it if you keep the two-child lease. And in Scotland, we've seen some limited mitigation of that. We've got the Scottish Child Payment, which is keeping people away from food banks. It is a real game changer in terms of making sure that families can get by in these very difficult times in this Westminster created cost of living crisis. So I don't understand the Labour Party and their stance, particularly because I remember very well the budget in 2015, which brought the two-child limit in as a policy. Coming into force eventually 2 years later. But in that debate on the budget, Keir Starmer himself spoke out about bringing in the rape clause which means that women who have had their third child as a result of rape or coercive control get an exemption to this policy. It's absolutely abhorrent to make women fill out a form to prove this, just to put food on the table. But Keir Starmer said that there should not be a rape test in social security policy, but yet somehow now, several years down the line, he's perfectly to accept that this policy stays. I think it's absolutely egregious. It should go. There is no justification for it, and we cannot have the situation where this policy, which catches more people within its grasp every single year, continues, because poverty levels will only increase if this policy is not abolished.
Well, absolutely, and this leaves Labour in this sort of difficult position where, you know, Keir Starmer has set his agenda on maintaining these policies, at least up till now, keep everything, don't rock the boat, and yet, in the debates today in the Scottish Parliament, we've seen the Scottish Labour, arguing against the two-child cap, etc., but yet with no clear plan how it will be removed by an incoming Labour government, or whether there is any kind of potential for movement there. And I would, very much compare this sort of maintaining the status quo may well also apply to policies such as Rwanda, to foreign policy, to a whole host of other issues with an incoming Labour government, which could be a real challenge on the basis that the reason that Labour will be the next government is how utterly fed up everyone is of the Tories. Now, if they fail to deliver anything on that, then not only will apathy rise, but I think there will be a very forceful right-wing reaction. William, sort of what would you say are your expectations of, as you said, a likely Labour government?
Well, I think Keir Starmer's lately said that he won't grow a backbone and get rid of the two-child cap unless it can be fully costed. But his other thing that he said was that he would implement it more fairly. And this seems to be a kind of mantra across the board. All the bad stuff will just do a bit better. It's like asking for marks for artistic merit. And I know that Rachel Reeves keeps telling us that we just don't have the money to do anything else. So we might as well put a smile on our face as we kick people in sensitive body parts. I think, though, they can get away with it, electorally speaking, because the Tories are in just such a terrible state at the moment. It'll be quite interesting to see what happens when they do get in. I suspect there will be a very fierce reaction in Scotland, particularly if, as seems increasingly likely, the people of Scotland vote more Labour MPs in. I'm not necessarily a majority of them, but certainly more Labour MPs. And they almost hand their trust to the Labour Party once again, because I think they'll be disappointed again. And who knows where we go from there? I suspect I might have part of the answer in the independence movement, but then I would say that, wouldn't I?
Well, absolutely you would. And finally, people in Scotland have received more than £30 million via 2 Scottish Government benefits to help them deal with increased energy costs this winter, new statistics have shown. Winter heating payment supports households on low incomes, including older people, disabled people, and families with children under 5. Child winter heating payment helps families of the most severely disabled children and young people. The official figures show that more than 400,000 winter heating payments of £55.05 were issued between November last year and the end of March. More than 30,000 child winter heating payments of £225.70 were made in the same period. Winter heating payment replaced the pre-existing UK government's cold weather payment in 2023. Most people getting it receive more money on average than via the cold weather payment. People receiving winter heating payment, whatever the weather, unlike cold weather payment, when the temperature needs to drop to a specific level. The child winter payment, introduced in 2020, is not available anywhere else in the UK. There is also no cap on the number of children who can receive it in the same family. Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Shirley-Anne Somerville, said that the £30.2 million paid over the course of the winter provides support to those who need it most. It is being paid quickly and effectively to help mitigate the worst of the cost of living crisis. Both winter heating payment and child winter heating payment have recently been increased in line with inflation, which means that we will be getting more money into people's pockets in 2024 and 2025. I'm pleased that we are getting the vast majority of these payments to people in good time. So with these two new benefits, there's clear evidence of how a smaller and ultimately bespoke Scottish welfare system can more easily respond to people's actual concerted needs. What would your aspirations in an independent Scotland be in regards to this, Alison?
So I missed the start of your question there.
I'm sorry, I'll repeat it. I was talking in regards to these bespoke payments in Scotland being good examples of how, approaching it on not a one-size-fits-all basis, but actually responding to the specific needs of people here, actually, more often than not, is more successful than a one-size-fits-all policy. And I was just wondering, in terms of this kind of approach, is there further policy that you yourselves, would ideally like to see down the line, say in an independent Scotland?
Yeah, I think if you look at Social Security Scotland and the way in which it has started its business and establishing some new benefits in Scotland, I think there's definitely more that can be done. And I was at the Independence March in Glasgow at the weekend, and there was a call out from Pensioners for Independence to say, well, actually, we need to start thinking about how do we deal with the state pension in an independent Scotland? How do we make sure that that's fair, that it meets people's needs, that it reflects conditions in Scotland as well? And I think there is work there to be done, but now that we have Social Security Scotland established, we're on good ground there, I think, to build from there.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that, William?
Actually, pensions was the one I was going to mention. I also was at the march and I heard what Marlene Halliday had to say about it. And it's certainly one of the things I would like to see fixed in an independent Scotland. I'd like to see something far closer to the European norm. It's gone up quite a bit this year, but it's still too low and it's still one of the lowest. The heating costs thing is just an example of what Scotland can do in a small way with limited resources and actually make it better than what the UK are doing with greater resources, which raises some questions about what the UK are doing for sure, but also certainly raises the question, what might Scotland be able to do if it had control of all its resources?
Well, absolutely. Well, that's it for this evening. Before I go, I would just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford, please consider donating £5 per month by becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. Thank you again to my guests, William Duguid and Alison Thewliss MP. And goodbye, thank you for watching, and good evening.